This video is going to be all about Bob Popovics bulkhead technique. We're going to start with what it is, how to do it correctly, what most people are going to struggle with as far as the execution, and then we'll finish with a quick comparison with the bulkhead compared to a bucktail deceiver. I'm Gunnar Brammer with Brammer's Custom Flies. So when we learned how to tie bucktail on the round, and we used our bucktail deceiver, Bob Popovics Bucktail Deceiver, as the example, we had these bucktail butts cut super clean, nice and vertical, very low profile, and we worked on progressing up the shank, increasing our density up the shank, increasing the density of the wing, and the importance of the length of the wing. Now all that holds true for the bulkhead. So then what's different? Instead of cutting the butts clean, you're going to leave the butts long, and then you're going to basically hollow tie the butts or reverse tie the butts and make kind of like a miniature muddler head that you're going to build up through progressive stacks. Now on a shank probably this long, a fly that's this proportional, you might only do it on the front two, right? It's typically a technique used to finish a fly, to put more bulk forward, with the emphasis being on altering the silhouette to match forage species that have a broader head profile, like a mullet. That's a very, very classic example. That was Bob Popovics' intention as far as taking bucktail, manipulating it into a mullet silhouette by using the bucktail butts, which are going to flare if you select it on the tail correct, in the correct position on the tail, and then you're going to be able to tame those into basically miniature muddler veils that are going to create this very blunt-faced fly. So we're going to take our bucktail butts here, and we're going to leave them long, and we're going to hollow tie them, and we're going to do it again on the front. We're going to leave them long, and we're going to hollow tie them. And then in the water, you're going to get this big massive water push, and the head won't be able to collapse, and you're going to get a nice broad head profile that's going to lead the teardrop silhouette. So this follows the exact layout as the bucktail deceiver. We went from long hair to medium hair. The stacks are getting closer together. Now this is a different hook model. It's the A-Rex blue water hook in a 3/0, so it's a shorter shank hook, so I'm compressing my stacks here to get all the hair in there, and then I did dress it with some whiting American Cape feathers just for some fun. Now, so the proper hair for a bulkhead and the reverse bulkhead is going to be in this lower section. This lower section of the tail, right where it attaches to the deer, is going to behave like deer body hair. In fact, this right here is deer body hair on the top side of the tail. Now, as you move up, that hair, the trapped air in the hair gets less and less and less and less until all the way up here it's more or less dull for the most part. So this is the sweet spot. When you compress this, the hair will flare up. You'll be able to turn the butts over and have control over them. Now, our emphasis in the bucktail deceiver was in perpendicular catching of the material. Absolutely critical here, because you need to catch perpendicular to the hook axis. You have to have an identical thread path. You can't have your thread kink off forward or backwards, because when you turn the butts over, you need a flush wall of bucktail butts to put your cone against. If you have thread that's kinked off and you turn the butts over, the butts will kink off in the same manner, and now you have to try to compress one side or the other. You're going to have kind of density issues and stiffness issues because you don't have a clean face to the hair. So you have to catch perpendicular. You can't kink it forward or backwards. So when you flip it over, it's a flush wall of bucktail butts. So let's get the hair from the right spot. This lower section, don't go ham on the density because we're going to do 2 stacks. I know it doesn't look like we have a lot of room here, but we're going to do 2 stacks. I'm going to prep it the same that we did before, clean out those butts. Now instead of cutting these flush, I'm going to leave them long, maybe a 1/2 inch. Now this depends on the proportions of the fly. If you have like a pike or muskie fly and you got 8 inches of hackle coming off, you can leave it 3/4 of an inch or an inch and really shape it back, and you'd want to use longer hair because the butts are eating up the length of the tips. So you have to fine tune that. So my tips are still proportional to the body, still bleeding in with my teardrop, so I can use these butts in this head section. Now I'm going to come up, pinch my thread using the Giovanni method, the pinch set, pull it straight down. Once it's locked in place, I can come up, and I need identical thread path perpendicular to the axis of my hook. Thumbnail on top, moving it around. You can see it's identical technique to the bucktail deceiver. If you've mastered that and practiced it, This is going to be right up your alley. Fully compress the hair. You can see, look at all that flare. That's because we chose it from the right spot on the bucktail. You have to do this with the right hair. Going to come up with tension. Going to come up with tension. Keep it perpendicular. I'm going to lock my bobbin in my non-dominant hand, and I'm going to force these backwards by creating a little cone with my fingers. I'm just going to force those backwards, and you want the hair to go straight back, not off to the side and get trapped on a bunch of other stuff. The whole goal is to have a perfectly clean face. Now never forget that this bobbin's locked up. Switch hands, pull it back. The thread needs to go straight to the hook eye, wrap it up. Now I can go forward and back, and those 5 turns that are trapping all of this down, those 5 turns are now locked in place. I only have 5 turns of bucktail or 5 turns of thread on here, and this hair can't pull out and it can't move because I took that thread forward and back. So this is all 100% secure, locked in, durable. Now I'm just going to manipulate this with my fingers. What you're going to do is you can kind of build up a little ball here of thread. Now you got to be careful because we're right next to the hook eye, but you want something for your relaxed thread to be able to fall against. So I built up just a little bit of thread ball here, just a little thread ball. Now, our emphasis in the thread control video on tension is imperative here. You're going to pull out more than you need. You're going to draw a perfect circle. You're going to keep that circle not this way or this way, but nice and perpendicular as you progress, trying to make a symmetrical cone with light tension. Because as you draw that cone up, this is kind of hard to do. Let me draw it. So you have all this hair kind of slicking back, and you're drawing a cone, and that cone is going to go over the base of the hair. If you see, there's overlapping patterns here. And this pressure up here has to be light, because if you pull this down, you'll reset the new base, and it'll all flare around like crazy. As you work up the hair, you have to keep the tension light. If you recompress it, it'll cinch all the way down to the hook, re-flare at those hard angles you'll never have any control over. So we're going to draw out more thread than we need. I'm right against the hair. I have a thread bump right where I need it. I'm going to lock my bobbin. I'm going to draw my circle with light thread tension, and I'm just going to collapse those butts until everything is perfect. I'm going to step down, back up against my hook eye. All this takes a lot of control. Then you're just going to take a little bit of head cement and make sure those light pressure wraps don't ever move. Now, that is the technique. And what you're going to do here is you're going to hold that collar hair, the long fibers that are creating your teardrop, so that you don't cut them. And you're just going to feather these edges so that you don't have a flush cut line. And those will bleed in with the next stack, which will bleed in with the next stack, depending on how many stacks you need for the proportions of your fly and how much bulk you want. When you're right up against the hook eye, it's a little tricky to get a really even density, so just go slow. The hook eye will, because it's kind of ovalized, you have some oval pressure on there. It's really hard to move it around, but just go slow. If you compress it, and you see right now I have more hair on bottom than I do top, stop. Rework it, recompress it. I like that much better. Another sound wrap, another sound wrap. And now instead of coming up and building a thread ball to lay your lax thread against, you have the hook eye here. Boom. So a little compare and contrast here. Your bulkhead versus your bucktail deceiver. Now, these obviously have, these two at least, because they're tied with the exact same hair on the exact same hook, they have the same proportions. They have a nearly identical silhouette, exception of the kind of head and the broad face to it, but they have the same teardrop, they have the same density, they're tied with the same exact bucktails. So what's going on here, let's say, action-wise? Because obviously this is more matching of a broad-faced mullet. This is a much more narrow, kind of fusiform shaped, little low-profile head dart fly. Now this hook, these kind of shorter shank saltwater hooks, all of the material resistance is back here, kind of in the wing, behind the weight of the hook. And since there's nothing up in the front really to balance that out, to balance out the hook weight, these flies tend to dip head first on the paw. So you go strip, strip, and they'll start to drop head first. This is why I think bulkheads are my all-time favorite fly to fish, and kind of the muddler style of flies. It's because I've now kind of just tenfold the amount of water resistance at the hook eye with a buoyant material, with trapped air. So as you strip this and pause it, it'll hover, it'll suspend, it has hang time. It's going to keep the fly in this lateral plane, and a lot of bulkhead style patterns, because they suspend, are going to have some sort of turn, profile turn, because all of the energy has to stay here. It has to stay on this plane. It can't just drop, but it balances out, and you'll get a lot of life to it, especially with a non-slip loop knot. That will be lateral deflection and hang time to a fly that you can fish really slow, hang in a fish's face, get to kind of change direction, because it's disturbing all this water. It's going to have little inconsistencies in the water coming at it and how you tie the hair, so it's going to want to move away from that pressure by turning sideways, and it can't dip head first because you've balanced it out with buoyancy. Now obviously it matches different silhouettes, has hang time, pushes more water, so there's going to be pros and cons to each, but the bulkhead is probably my all-time favorite fly ever. So that's Bob Popovics Bulkhead, his technique, the recipe breakdown, and how to tie it. Extremely clean with complete control over the hair, smooth front face, no kind of inconsistency in how the hair is going to turn back, with a complete control over your thread cone. So thanks for watching, guys. I'll catch you in the next one.